Tonight, I have another quiet story to share with you. First, please turn the volume down a little and adjust it to a comfortable level. And if you think you may want to return tomorrow night, you may wish to subscribe now, so this channel will be easy to find whenever you are ready to sleep again. When you get into bed, thoughts about today or tomorrow may fill your mind, and you may feel pressure to fall asleep. But there is no need to force it. Simply let my quiet voice draw your attention away from those thoughts. You do not need to follow every word. Just let it drift by like soft background music. And if you fall asleep along the way, that is perfectly all right. Now, let us slowly begin tonight's story. Long ago, across the enormous breadth of Eurasia, people moved from one settlement to another, carrying objects, food, knowledge, stories, and beliefs. They followed rivers where water was available. They crossed plains where horses could travel. They passed through valleys between mountains, and they rested in green oases surrounded by dry land. Along the coasts, sailors learned to use winds and currents, linking distant ports across seas that once seemed almost impossibly wide. Over many centuries, these separate journeys gradually formed a vast network. Today, we often call that network the Silk Road. Yet the name can be misleading because there was never only one road, and silk was never the only thing that moved upon it. Historians often speak instead of the Silk Roads, in the plural. This is a more accurate way to describe the many land routes, sea routes, river routes, mountain passes, desert tracks, city streets, and harbor approaches that connected large parts of Asia, Europe, and Africa. The network reached from China and the Korean Peninsula toward Central Asia. It extended south toward India and Southeast Asia, west through Iran and Mesopotamia, and onward toward the Mediterranean world. Maritime routes joined China to ports in Southeast Asia, India, the Arabian Peninsula, Eastern Africa, and the Near East. The paths were never fixed for all time. A route might flourish when an empire offered protection, then fade when war made travel dangerous. A river might change its course. A desert spring might dry up. A new port might become important. Merchants adjusted, turning north or south, taking a ship where an older generation had taken a caravan, or returning to land when conditions at sea became uncertain. It may be peaceful to imagine this network not as a single line on a map, but as a living web. At one moment, a caravan might be moving slowly through the dust outside a Central Asian town. At another, a ship might be leaving a harbour with fresh water stored for a long voyage. In a market, a merchant might be weighing spices. In a monastery, a traveller might be copying a religious text. In a palace, a ruler might be receiving silk as a diplomatic gift. Far away, someone who had never seen China might touch a piece of Chinese cloth without knowing how many people had carried it, sold it, stored it, and carried it again. Very few travelers crossed the entire distance from eastern China to the Mediterranean. Most goods traveled in stages. A merchant might carry a cargo from one city to another and sell it there. A second merchant would take it farther. The object might change hands many times before reaching its final destination. In this relay trade, the Silk Roads were less like a single journey and more like a chain of overlapping journeys. This also meant that the people along the middle of the network were not merely standing between great civilizations at the eastern and western ends. Central Asian communities, steppe peoples, oasis towns, Indian merchants, Iranian traders, Arab sailors, and many others shaped the network in their own right. They selected what to buy and sell. They translated languages. They guided caravans. They offered animals, food, shelter, and local knowledge. They carried artistic styles and religious ideas in new directions. The Silk Roads were created by countless local decisions, repeated generation after generation. The name itself is much newer than the roads. In the 19th century, the German geographer Ferdinand von Richthofen used the term Seidenstraße, meaning Silk Road, to describe the routes of trade and communication. The expression became widely familiar later, especially during the 20th century. By then, many of the ancient routes had changed or lost their former importance. Yet the name was powerful. It suggested distance, rarity, color, and movement. It gave people a way to imagine the many connections that had linked distant societies for more than 2,000 years. But before the name, there were simply journeys. There were roads with no single title. There were paths known to guides, caravan leaders, soldiers, pilgrims, sailors, and local families. There were stretches of track between wells. There were gates at city walls. There were mountain passes that opened only in certain seasons. There were docks where people waited for favorable winds. And at the heart of the name was silk, a material light enough to travel far, valuable enough to justify dangerous journeys, and beautiful enough to attract rulers, merchants, religious institutions, and wealthy families across many cultures. Silk begins with a very small creature. The finest traditional Chinese silk was made from the filament of the silkworm, known as Bombyx mori. This silkworm is the caterpillar of a moth that has been domesticated over a very long period. The moth is blind and unable to fly. It mates, lays hundreds of eggs within a few days, and then dies. From the eggs come tiny caterpillars, which are fed the leaves of the white mulberry tree. For several weeks, the silkworms eat and grow. Their care requires attention, warmth, clean conditions, and a reliable supply of leaves. When they are ready, they produce a liquid from glands in their bodies. The liquid hardens into a fine filament as it reaches the air. Slowly, the worm wraps the filament around itself, creating a cocoon. A single cocoon can contain a remarkably long, continuous filament. To unwind it, producers traditionally heated or boiled the cocoon, softening the natural gum that held the fibers together. Several delicate filaments could then be combined into a stronger thread, wound onto reels, dyed, spun with other fibers, and woven on looms. The process required a great deal of labor. Mulberry trees had to be cultivated. Eggs had to be protected. Silkworms had to be fed throughout the day. Cocoons had to be gathered at the correct time. Threads had to be reeled without breaking. The finished cloth carried within it the work of many hands and the careful timing of an agricultural season. In ancient China, silk production was traditionally associated especially with women's work. It was surrounded by customs and rituals intended to protect the silkworms and ensure an abundant result. The making of silk was not merely a mechanical process. It was part of household life, agriculture, taxation, court ceremony, and the wider economy. Silk was valued for many practical qualities. It is light, strong, and flexible. It can feel cool in warm weather and warm in cool weather. It absorbs dye well, allowing colors to appear rich and luminous. It reflects light with a gentle shimmer, and it falls gracefully around the body. These qualities made it suitable for clothing, banners, ceremonial fabrics, religious hangings, and objects associated with status and authority. In early Chinese history, silk was closely connected with the imperial court. It was used for garments, draperies, and objects of prestige. Over time, its use spread more widely through Chinese society. It served not only as cloth, but also as a form of wealth. Under the Han Dynasty, silk could be offered as tribute or diplomatic payment. Farmers could pay taxes in silk, and officials could receive silk as part of their salaries. Bolts of cloth could function somewhat like money because they were standardized, portable, useful, and widely valued. Silk also had purposes beyond clothing. It could be used for fishing lines, musical instrument strings, and early forms of writing material. The same qualities that made the fiber suitable for textiles made it useful in other areas of life. Chinese authorities guarded the knowledge of sericulture for centuries. The techniques of raising silkworms and producing the finest thread were treated as valuable secrets. Yet the cloth itself travelled beyond China. Silk became a gift to neighbouring rulers, an item exchanged at frontiers, and eventually one of the most famous products carried across Eurasia. Archaeological finds show that silk moved far from its place of production. Chinese textiles from ancient periods have been found in regions as distant as Egypt and northern Mongolia. Evidence of silk has appeared in Central Asian sites. The exact origins of every ancient fragment are not always certain, because forms of silk were also produced outside China, including varieties in India and the Mediterranean region. Still, Chinese silk achieved a particular reputation for quality. The knowledge of silk production gradually moved beyond China as well. Sericulture reached Korea in ancient times and later became established in Japan. It spread to India and Central Asia. By the 6th century of the Common Era, silk production also became established in the Byzantine world. A famous traditional account describes monks carrying silkworm eggs, or larvae, and mulberry material hidden in hollow walking staffs to the court of Emperor Justinian. Whether every detail of that story unfolded exactly as later writers described it, the broader development is clear. China's exclusive control over the method did not last forever. Even after silk was produced in other regions, Chinese silk remained highly desired. Different centers developed their own weaving methods, patterns, colors, and styles. A design might begin in one culture, be adapted in another, and return in a changed form. Silk became a surface on which cultures could meet. A woven roundel, a tree, a winged horse, a lotus, a pomegranate, a pair of birds, or a geometric border could travel from one artistic world into another. Weavers did not simply copy. They selected, rearranged, and transformed. An image associated with one religion or royal court might become a decorative pattern somewhere else. Techniques moved with artisans, merchants, captives, gifts, and imported fabrics. This may be one reason silk offers such a fitting name for the larger network. The cloth itself is made from many nearly invisible filaments, combined into thread. The silk roads, too, were made from countless small movements combined into something vast. No single journey created the network. No single empire controlled it for most of its history. Like woven fabric, it gained strength through connection. The exchange of goods across Eurasia began long before the Han Dynasty, and long before anyone spoke of a Silk Road. Human communities had always traded with neighbors, and those neighbors traded with others. Materials could travel astonishing distances through a series of local exchanges, even when no individual knew the full path. Jade moved toward the centers of ancient China from regions far to the west. Some routes across what is now western China may have been used for jade thousands of years before silk became the most famous commodity associated with them. Horses traveled across the steppe. Metals, stones, shells, and crafted objects moved between communities. The paths later connected with the Silk Roads often had older lives and older purposes. Far to the west, the Persian Achaemenid Empire developed the Royal Road. It connected Susa, in what is now Iran, with Sardis, near the Mediterranean in what is now Turkey. The main route extended for more than 1,600 miles. Additional roads linked Mesopotamia with regions toward the Indian subcontinent and Egypt. Imperial messengers, officials, soldiers, and merchants used these roads. Stations along the way supported movement across a large and varied empire. Several centuries before formal Han expansion into Central Asia, these Persian roads showed how political power could organize long-distance communication. Later, parts of older routes were absorbed into the wider systems that connected with the Silk Roads. Alexander the Great used the Royal Road during his campaigns into Persia, and the Hellenistic kingdoms that followed his conquests helped create new contacts between the Mediterranean world and regions of Central and South Asia. To the north, the broad grasslands of the Eurasian steppe supported another kind of mobility. Pastoral peoples moved with horses and herds. Their societies possessed deep knowledge of open landscapes, seasonal conditions, and long-distance travel. Steppe routes did not always resemble the carefully maintained roads of an empire, yet they formed essential lines of communication and exchange. Nomadic and semi-nomadic communities carried animals, equipment, techniques, and information across great distances. To the south, maritime links already connected Mesopotamia, the Arabian Peninsula, and the Indus Valley in very ancient times. Coastal sailing did not require a single voyage across an entire ocean. Ships could travel between ports, waiting for favorable weather, and replenishing water and food along the way. Over generations, these shorter links formed extensive sea networks. So when the Silk Roads expanded during the Han period, they did not emerge from an empty landscape. They joined and strengthened older systems. Chinese frontier routes connected with Central Asian paths. Central Asian routes connected with Iranian roads. Iranian roads connected with Mesopotamian cities and Mediterranean ports. Indian merchants linked overland and maritime worlds. Sailors of the Arabian Sea and Indian Ocean connected ports whose histories reached back many centuries. The growth of the network depended on geography. Mountain chains directed movement through passes. Deserts forced travelers toward oases. Rivers offered water and transport, but could also flood, change course, or disappear. Political borders sometimes redirected merchants. If one empire became hostile, traders looked for alternatives. If a ruler protected a road and reduced banditry, traffic increased. If a city offered reliable markets, warehouses, and skilled translators, it became a hub. It is helpful to remember that ancient people did not see the whole network from above, as we do on a modern map. A merchant knew certain roads well and heard reports about others. A sailor knew a chain of ports and the seasons of the winds. An envoy carried information from courts he had visited. A monk knew where monasteries offered lodging. A caravan leader remembered wells, grazing areas, toll stations, and dangerous stretches. Knowledge travelled gradually, just as objects did. A report of a distant country might pass through several languages. A ruler might hear of powerful horses in a western valley, or of a wealthy kingdom beyond a desert, without having direct contact with it. Such information could inspire a mission. And one of the most important missions in the history of the Silk Roads began not as a commercial expedition, but as an attempt to form a military alliance. In the 2nd century before the Common Era, the Han dynasty ruled a large and increasingly powerful Chinese empire. To the north and northwest, the Xiongnu Confederation presented a serious challenge. Emperor Wu, also known as Han Wudi, sought allies who might help oppose them. The emperor sent an envoy named Zhang Qian toward the west. Sources give slightly different dates for his departure, commonly placing it around 139 or 138 BCE. His task was diplomatic. He was to seek the Yuji, a people who had been driven westward by the Xiongnu, and encourage them to join the Han in an alliance. The mission did not proceed as planned. Zhang Qian was captured by the Xiongnu and held for many years. He eventually escaped and continued west. He travelled through regions of Central Asia that were little known at the Han court. He reached areas associated with the Fergana Valley, Sogdiana, and Bactria. He found the Yuji, but they were no longer eager to return east and fight their former enemies. The proposed alliance was not achieved. Yet the mission produced something of immense value: information. Zhang Qian learned about lands, peoples, products, political conditions, and routes beyond the western frontier. After roughly 13 years away, he returned to China. His reports gave the emperor a clearer picture of Central Asia and the possibilities that lay beyond it. This is a quiet reminder that an expedition can fail in its original purpose and still change history. Zhang Qian did not bring back the military alliance he had been sent to secure. Instead, he brought knowledge. That knowledge helped the Han court imagine a wider world of relationships. One subject attracted particular interest: the powerful horses of the Fergana Valley. Chinese sources celebrated these animals, sometimes describing them in almost heavenly terms. The Han military needed strong horses for campaigns against mounted opponents. Access to Western breeds, therefore, had both practical and symbolic importance. Han expansion into the northwest followed. Military campaigns and fortified positions helped secure the Hexi Corridor, a long, narrow passage between highlands and desert. The corridor became one of the great gateways from the Chinese heartland toward the regions later known as the Western Territories. The Great Wall system was extended in areas connected with the route, and garrisons protected important points. Around the late 2nd century BCE, official missions, tribute exchanges, military movements, and trade increasingly linked Han China with Central Asia. Dates vary according to how historians define the formal opening, but the process is often associated with the period from about 130 to 114 BCE. It was not a single ceremony in which a road suddenly opened. It was a gradual widening of contact, made possible by exploration, diplomacy, conquest, protection, and commerce. Zhang Tian was sent west again, this time with greater knowledge and broader diplomatic aims. Han envoys travelled to neighbouring states. Foreign envoys reached China. Gifts and tribute moved in both directions. Silk was especially useful in this world of diplomacy because it was prestigious, portable, and available to the Chinese court in large quantities. From the Han capital of Chang'an, near modern Xi'an, routes ran westward. Travellers entered the Hexi Corridor, passing through a chain of settlements and defensive positions. Beyond lay Dunhuang, an oasis near the edge of the great deserts. From there, the roads divided. One route passed north of the Taklamakan Desert. Another followed the southern edge. A further northern path moved toward the Tian Shan Mountains. These routes linked oases such as Turpan, Kucha, Khotan, and others, eventually converging toward Kashgar. The exact importance of each branch changed over time. Travellers selected paths according to water, politics, weather, and security. The Taklamakan was one of the most formidable environments along the network. Its name has often inspired dramatic translations, but even without legend, its geography was enough to command respect. Sand, heat, cold, wind, and distance made direct crossing extremely dangerous. The routes therefore followed the margins of the desert, where water flowing from surrounding mountains supported oasis communities. An oasis was more than a patch of green. It could be a town, with farms, workshops, temples, markets, and multilingual populations. It could provide grain, fruit, animals, guides, and information. It could also collect taxes or tolls. For travelers who had crossed a long, dry stretch, the sight of trees and cultivated fields must have signaled relief. Dunhuang became one of the most famous of these places. It stood near the point where routes divided around the desert, and where travelers entered or left the Chinese imperial sphere. Over centuries, Buddhist communities created cave temples in cliffs near the city. The Mogao caves eventually held paintings, sculpture, manuscripts, and textiles that reflected the cultural mixture of the Silk Roads. The road west from Dunhuang was never simply a Chinese road leading toward a passive outside world. Each oasis had its own history. Kingdoms rose and fell. Languages changed. Local rulers negotiated with larger empires. Merchants from many backgrounds passed through. Chinese influence expanded in some periods and contracted in others. The Han Dynasty itself did not last forever. It ruled, with an interruption, from 206 BCE to 220 CE. Yet the connections established during its expansion had lasting effects. Silk moved westward. Horses, glass, precious metals, and other goods moved eastward. Buddhism, originating in India and already established in Central Asia, began to enter China. The routes created under political and military pressure became channels of cultural transformation. And still, no caravan needed to understand the full historical significance of what it carried. A bundle of cloth was a bundle of cloth. A horse was an animal to be fed, guarded, and sold. A manuscript was a set of teachings to be preserved. History accumulated slowly, through ordinary acts repeated along extraordinary distances. Beyond the western edges of the Chinese deserts, the routes opened into the varied landscapes of Central Asia. Here were high mountains, broad valleys, steppe grasslands, dry basins, and cities nourished by rivers. The region was not simply a bridge between China and the Mediterranean. It was a world of powerful communities, skilled merchants, farmers, herders, artisans, translators, rulers, and religious teachers. Kashgar stood near an important meeting point. Routes arriving from the north and south of the Taklamakan came together there, before dividing again toward different mountain passes and valleys. From Kashgar, one path could lead through the Ale Valley toward areas near modern Termez and ancient Balkh. Another could pass through routes connected with the Fergana Valley, then continue across or around the great dry lands farther west. The Fergana Valley was known for agriculture and for the horses that attracted the attention of Han China. Water from surrounding mountains supported fertile settlements. The valley also connected steppe, mountain, and oasis worlds. Control of such a region offered access not only to animals and crops, but also to the movement of people. Farther south lay Bactria, in territory that now includes parts of Afghanistan and neighboring regions. This area had been influenced by the conquests of Alexander the Great and by the Hellenistic kingdoms that followed. Greek artistic traditions, Iranian cultures, Indian religions, and local forms met there over long periods. Later, the Kushan Empire controlled important territories across Central and South Asia and benefited from trade through the network. To the west, Sogdiana became especially famous for its merchants. Sogdian communities were centered in regions around cities such as Samarkand and Bukhara. Their language and commercial networks reached far beyond their homeland. Sogdian traders appeared in Chinese cities, Central Asian oases, and other distant markets. They were skilled at operating across cultural and political boundaries. A Sogdian merchant might know several languages, or rely on partners who did. He might send relatives to establish communities along distant routes. Letters, contracts, and shared customs helped maintain trust across long distances. Sogdian traders carried silk westward and brought other goods eastward. They also helped transmit religious traditions, including forms of Buddhism, Christianity, Zoroastrianism, and Manichaeism. In the history of the Silk Roads, the ability to translate was as valuable as the ability to transport. A camel could carry cloth, but someone had to explain its quality, negotiate its price, and understand local rules. A diplomat could present a gift, but someone had to interpret the message that accompanied it. A sacred text could cross a frontier, but someone had to render its teachings into a language understood by a new community. Central Asian cities became places where these tasks were performed every day. Markets offered local and imported goods. Workshops adapted foreign designs. Inns provided shelter. Religious buildings served communities whose origins lay far apart. A traveler might hear several languages during a single walk through a busy trading quarter. Samarkand stood near the center of this world. Its position allowed it to connect routes from China, India, Iran, and the steppe. Merv, farther west in what is now Turkmenistan, was another major junction. Roads from northern and southern branches met near it. From Merv, travelers could continue across northeastern Iran, toward Mesopotamia and the Mediterranean, or connect with routes toward the Persian Gulf. The city of Merv grew and changed under different rulers. Like many Silk Road cities, it was shaped by the rise and fall of empires. Its importance came partly from location, partly from water, and partly from the concentration of people who knew how to serve long-distance trade. Such cities needed farmers to feed residents and visitors, craftsmen to repair equipment, money changers to deal with different currencies, and officials to manage taxes and security. One can imagine arriving after days of travel. The animals would need water. Packs would be inspected. Dust would cover clothing and goods. News would pass quickly. A road ahead was safe, a bridge damaged, a ruler dead, a tax increased, a bandit group active, a market crowded with buyers. Information of this kind could determine the next decision. The Silk Roads were never only about rare luxury goods. Caravans needed ordinary supplies at every stage. Grain, dried food, fodder, leather, rope, tools, and containers were essential. Local trade supported long-distance trade. A famous piece of silk might attract attention in a distant palace, but its journey depended on humble objects and daily labor. Dates, saffron, pistachios, incense, medicinal plants, perfumes, and precious stones moved through Central Asian markets. So did cotton, wool, animal skins, wood, metalwork, ceramics, and glass. Some products traveled far. Others were sold only a few days from where they were made. The network was filled with both grand and ordinary exchange. Along with merchants came envoys and soldiers. Empires sought influence over the same routes that traders used. A protected corridor could bring revenue. A captured city could block a rival. A diplomatic marriage or treaty could open movement. War could close it again. The Parthian Empire, centered in Iran and Mesopotamia, served as an important link between Central Asia and the Mediterranean world during the centuries around the beginning of the Common Era. Parthian merchants and officials occupied a strategic middle position. They did not merely pass Chinese goods directly onward. They participated in trade, controlled territory, and gained wealth from exchange. The Romans at the western end often had little direct knowledge of China. Chinese sources, likewise, possessed only indirect information about Rome. The two empires were connected largely through intermediaries. Goods could travel farther than the people who made them, and stories about distant lands could become mixed with wonder. The ancient Greeks used the word Ceres for a distant land associated with silk. The exact meaning of such terms shifted, and geographical knowledge remained incomplete. Roman writers sometimes misunderstood how silk was produced. One account imagined that it came from a kind of material combed from trees. This mistaken idea reveals the distance between consumer and producer. By the 1st century of the Common Era, Chinese silk had become highly fashionable in Rome. It was rare, light, colorful, and unlike familiar fabrics. Roman elites used it as a sign of wealth. Some moralists complained that silk clothing encouraged luxury or drained precious metals away from the empire. Yet demand continued. Silk was associated with spectacle and power. It appeared in the clothing of the wealthy and in courtly display. Julius Caesar was remembered for using silk canopies during a triumph. Centuries later, when Alaric and the Visigoths besieged Rome, the ransom reportedly included thousands of silk tunics, along with gold and silver. Whether used as dress, tribute, or ransom, silk had become a form of prestige understood far from China. Trade moved in both directions. From western regions came gold, silver, glass, coral, amber, wine, honey, horses, and other products. Roman and Near Eastern glassware reached Asia. Techniques of glassmaking moved eastward. Artistic forms traveled with finished objects and with artisans who knew how to reproduce them. The routes connecting Central Asia to the Mediterranean passed through a sequence of important cities. From Merv, roads could cross the Iranian plateau toward Ecbatana and the Zagros Mountains. They could reach Ctesiphon and Seleucia near the Tigris River. Another branch led through Susa toward the Persian Gulf. Routes continued through the Syrian desert to cities such as Palmyra and Antioch, or toward Petra and Alexandria. Palmyra became a celebrated caravan city. Situated at an oasis in the Syrian desert, it connected Mesopotamian trade with the Roman Mediterranean. Its merchants developed wide networks and benefited from the movement of valuable goods. Monumental buildings reflected the wealth created by its position. Antioch, near the eastern Mediterranean, linked inland roads with maritime routes. Goods arriving there could be shipped to other ports and distributed through the Roman world. Alexandria in Egypt served another vast commercial sphere, connecting the Mediterranean with the Red Sea and Indian Ocean routes. No one city permanently controlled the entire flow. Goods could turn toward the Black Sea, move south toward Egypt, or pass through the Persian Gulf. Political competition often encouraged alternative paths. Roman merchants sometimes sought routes that avoided Parthian territory. Rival states understood that control over trade could strengthen an enemy as well as enrich themselves. The geography of the network therefore resembled water, finding channels through a changing landscape. Block one route, and movement might search for another. Protect a new road, and traffic might gather there. The flexibility of the Silk Roads helped them survive political changes that destroyed individual empires. The overland journey was difficult even during peaceful times. Roads were often poor. In some places, there was no constructed road at all, only a path marked by earlier travelers. Caravans crossed deserts, climbed mountain passes, and moved through regions of severe heat and cold. The animals most closely associated with the Silk Roads were horses and camels. Horses offered speed and were essential for messengers, soldiers, and travelers. Camels were especially suited to dry environments. The two-humped Bactrian camel could endure cold Central Asian winters as well as arid conditions. It carried heavy loads and moved steadily across difficult ground. A caravan might include many animals, but size varied. Some merchants joined together for safety. Others traveled under the protection of officials or armed guards. Goods were packed in ways that balanced weight on either side of an animal. Every load had to be secured against shifting, rain, dust, and theft. Daily progress depended on terrain. In regions with good services, caravanserais were sometimes spaced roughly a day's journey apart, often around 30 to 40 kilometers. These large inns offered enclosed spaces where merchants could rest, eat, water animals, and prepare for the next stage. Their gates could be closed at night, providing greater safety than an exposed camp. Caravanserais varied in form and comfort. Many were built around a central courtyard, with rooms or storage areas along the sides. Animals and cargo could be brought inside. Merchants might meet buyers, exchange news, hire guides, or arrange the sale of goods. A caravanserai was both a shelter and a small commercial world. From Turkey through Iran and Central Asia toward China and the Indian subcontinent, networks of such inns supported travel. Their construction increased as trade grew, especially from around the 10th century onward in many regions. Some surviving buildings still show the scale of investment once devoted to the movement of caravans. But between inns, danger remained. Bandits knew that merchants carried valuable cargo. Raiders could attack isolated groups. Officials could demand unexpected payments. Political conflict might turn a familiar road into a frontier. Nature presented its own risks. A sandstorm could erase tracks and separate travelers. Snow could close a pass. Floodwater could destroy a bridge. Extreme cold threatened both people and animals. In deserts, the failure to find water could become fatal. In high mountains, thin air, rockfalls, and sudden weather made progress slow. Starvation and imprisonment appear repeatedly in accounts of long-distance travel. So do illness and exhaustion. The romantic image of a caravan moving beneath a golden sunset can be beautiful, but the historical journey demanded endurance. Travelers prepared by gathering local knowledge. They asked when a pass would open, where grass could be found, which wells were reliable, and which authorities controlled the next town. Guides familiar with a region were essential. A wrong turn in settled country might cause delay. A wrong turn in a desert could be disastrous. The rhythm of caravan travel was shaped by animals. Camels had to be loaded and unloaded. Horses needed rest and fodder. Injured animals slowed everyone. A valuable animal might be treated with as much concern as a valuable object, because without transport, the cargo could not move. At night, people slept near their goods. Fires provided warmth where fuel was available. Meals were simple and depended on supplies carried or purchased. Stories and news may have passed from one group to another, though the details of countless ordinary conversations are lost to history. We do know that merchants had to learn customs and languages. Successful exchange required more than courage. It required patience, memory, calculation, and social skill. A trader had to judge quality, understand measures and currencies, and recognize trustworthy partners. He had to know when to sell and when to wait. Collections and letters helped maintain business across distance. Families and ethnic communities formed networks of trust. Religious institutions sometimes offered hospitality. Rulers issued documents of passage. Under favorable conditions, these arrangements made travel more predictable. Yet the fact that few people went from one end of Eurasia to the other did not weaken the network. It strengthened the role of each local segment. Goods could continue moving even when one merchant turned back. The journey belonged to many people. Imagine a bolt of silk beginning near Chang'an. It might travel to an oasis kingdom, where it was exchanged for horses or stones. A Sogdian merchant might carry it farther to Samarkand. Another trader might move it toward Merv. From there it could cross Iranian territory and reach Mesopotamia. A caravan bound for Syria might deliver it to Palmyra. Then a Mediterranean merchant might take it to Antioch, and the ship might carry it to Italy. By the time it reached a Roman household, the cloth had accumulated transportation costs, tolls, profits, losses, and stories. Its price reflected distance and danger. Yet the buyer may have known almost nothing of the silkworm, the mulberry tree, the weaver, or the long sequence of intermediaries. The same was true in the opposite direction. A piece of Roman glass arriving in China might appear mysterious and precious. Its maker had never seen the Chinese court where it was displayed. The object crossed cultural boundaries that its creator could not have imagined. The sea formed another great part of the Silk Roads. Maritime routes connected the eastern coast of China and Southeast Asia with India, the Arabian Peninsula, the Persian Gulf, the Red Sea, Eastern Africa, and the— because spices were among their famous cargoes, Some of these routes are also called the spice routes. Sea travel could carry large quantities of goods more cheaply than overland caravans, but it brought different dangers. Ships depended on weather, navigation, construction, and the availability of fresh water. Storms could destroy a vessel. Pirates sought valuable cargoes. A mistake in timing could leave sailors waiting for a seasonal wind. Knowledge of monsoon patterns transformed Indian Ocean travel. Winds blow in broadly predictable seasonal directions, allowing sailors to plan outward and return voyages. Arab, Persian, Indian, Southeast Asian, and later Chinese mariners built on generations of observation. Early maritime links had connected Mesopotamia, the Arabian Peninsula, and the Indus Valley thousands of years before the medieval period. Over time, the network expanded. By the early Middle Ages, sailors from the Arabian Peninsula were establishing long routes across the Arabian Sea and Indian Ocean. Regular maritime connections between Arabia and China existed by at least the 8th century of the Common Era. Advances in shipbuilding, astronomy, and navigation made these voyages more practical. Mariners observed stars, coastlines, winds, currents, and the behavior of water. Different regions developed vessels suited to their conditions. Knowledge moved between maritime cultures, just as weaving methods moved along land routes. Ports became essential centers of exchange. Zanzibar on the East African coast, Muscat in Oman, Goa in India, and Alexandria in Egypt were among the cities linked to these maritime worlds. Other important ports rose in Southeast Asia, southern China, the Persian Gulf, and the Red Sea. A port was never only a place where ships loaded and unloaded. It needed warehouses, markets, wells, repair facilities, food supplies, officials, translators, and communities familiar with foreign traders. Sailors could spend weeks or months waiting for winds. During that time, they bought food, repaired ships, visited places of worship, and interacted with local residents. Fresh water was one of the greatest concerns. A ship could carry valuable spices, ceramics, textiles, metalwork, and precious stones. But without enough drinking water, none of the cargo mattered. Ports allowed crews to refill containers and prepare for the next passage. Maritime merchants also used relay systems. A cargo might move from China to Southeast Asia, then to India, then to the Arabian Peninsula, and onward to the Mediterranean. It might change ships several times. Coastal trade connected local products to long-distance routes. The sea network carried Chinese ceramics and silk toward the west. Spices from Southeast Asia and India traveled toward both east and west. Incense from Arabia and Eastern Africa moved into religious and domestic markets. Ivory, precious woods, gems, metals, cotton textiles, and food products joined the flow. Religions traveled by sea as well. Hindu and Buddhist traditions spread through maritime Southeast Asia. Later, Muslim merchants helped introduce Islam to communities in Indonesia and Malaysia. Religious change was not always the result of conquest. It could grow through marriage, settlement, trade relationships, teaching, and the prestige of foreign commercial communities. Chinese ports became increasingly cosmopolitan during periods of strong maritime trade. Foreign merchants established neighborhoods and places of worship. Officials regulated commerce and collected taxes. The southern city of Guangzhou was one important center. Quanzhou later became a major port connected with the Indian Ocean world. The overland and maritime networks were not rivals in a simple sense. They supported one another. A cargo arriving at a Persian Gulf port could travel up the Tigris or Euphrates and join land routes. Goods reaching an Indian port could move inland toward Central Asia. A caravan might end at a harbor where its cargo was transferred to a ship. Different conditions favored different methods. Silk and other light luxury goods could bear the cost of overland transport. Heavy ceramics and bulk cargo often benefited from sea travel. Political conflict might close a land corridor and increase maritime trade. Piracy or war at sea might push merchants back toward land. The Silk Roads were therefore not a contest between camel and ship. They were a connected system in which roads, rivers, and seas met. A merchant chose among them according to cost, safety, season, and opportunity. One may picture a harbor at dusk, its population temporarily enlarged by crews from distant coasts. Languages mix in the market. A ship takes on water. Sacks of spices are inspected. Ceramic jars are packed. A traveler asks when the wind will change. The sea beyond the breakwater is quiet for the moment, but everyone knows that the next voyage will depend on forces larger than any individual plan. After the fall of the Han Dynasty, political unity in China broke apart. The roots did not disappear, but their conditions changed. Kingdoms and dynasties rose in different regions. Control of the Northwest shifted. Buddhism continued to move into China through Central Asian communities and translated texts. Foreign merchants still reached Chinese cities, though the volume and safety of travel varied. Centuries later, the Sui dynasty reunited China, and the Tang dynasty followed in 618. Under the Tang, the Silk Roads entered one of their most celebrated periods. Tang power expanded toward Central Asia, and for important stretches of time, the empire controlled or influenced key routes in the western regions. The overland roads opened, closed, and reopened as Tang armies competed with Turkic powers and the Tibetan Empire. In 639, Tang campaigns restored control over western routes. Later, conflict closed access. In 699, the Tang again re-established important positions. Such dates remind us that even during a so-called Golden Age, travel depended on military and political change. The Tang capital, Chang'an, stood near the eastern end of the Great Overland Network. It became one of the largest and most cosmopolitan cities in the world. Its broad avenues and organized wards contained officials, craftsmen, soldiers, monks, scholars, entertainers, and merchants from many regions. Travelers and residents came from Central Asia, Persia, India, Korea, Japan, Southeast Asia, and the steppe. Sogdian merchant families formed communities. Foreign envoys brought gifts and requests. Buddhist monks studied and translated. Musicians and dancers introduced styles that became fashionable at court. Chang'an was not merely a place where foreign things were displayed. It was a city in which cultures were changed through contact. Clothing, food, music, dance, painting, metalwork, and religious practice all reflected connections beyond China. Some influences were welcomed enthusiastically. Others were controlled or viewed with suspicion, especially when political conditions changed. The Tang court valued horses from the West. In the 8th century, silk was traded in large quantities for horses held by Uyghur and Fergana peoples. One reported exchange rate was 40 bolts of silk for a pony. Such trade linked the luxury textile economy to military power. Silk itself changed through these encounters. Chinese weavers adapted patterns associated with Sogdian, Sasanian Persian, Indian, and other artistic traditions. Roundels containing animals, trees, and riders appeared in new arrangements. Gold-wrapped thread and foreign motifs entered Chinese textiles. In return, Chinese weaving methods and designs influenced distant workshops. The exchange was not linear. A motif might travel from Iran to China, be transformed there, and later appear in another region in a new form. An imported textile could be copied by local weavers using different materials. A pattern detached from its original religious meaning might become court decoration. The city of Dunhuang preserved remarkable evidence of this world. Near the oasis, Buddhist cave temples were decorated over many centuries. Their wall paintings show donors, monks, celestial beings, musicians, rulers, and scenes of travel. The caves contained textiles and manuscripts in several languages. One chamber, later known as the Library Cave, was sealed with tens of thousands of manuscripts and objects. The materials included Buddhist texts as well as secular documents. Their languages reflected the diversity of the region. When the chamber was discovered around the beginning of the 20th century, it transformed modern understanding of the Silk Roads. The documents show that people did not simply carry finished ideas from one end of Eurasia to another. They translated, summarized, debated, and adapted. Buddhism had begun in India, but as it moved through Central Asia into China, its texts entered new linguistic and philosophical worlds. Translators faced difficult choices. A word with a precise meaning in Sanskrit might have no exact Chinese equivalent. Concepts had to be explained through familiar terms. New vocabularies developed. Monasteries became centers of translation, education, art, and hospitality. Buddhist images also changed. Artistic traditions associated with India, Iran, the Hellenistic world, Central Asia, and China influenced the representation of the Buddha and other sacred figures. In some regions, robes were depicted with folds resembling Greco-Roman sculpture. Elsewhere, faces, gestures, and settings took on local forms. The giant Buddha statues once standing at Bamiyan in Afghanistan were among the most dramatic monuments associated with these exchanges. Buddhist sites also appeared in Central Asian oases, at Dunhuang, and farther east. UNESCO has noted the extraordinary geographical range of Buddhist art along the Silk Roads, from Afghanistan to Mount Wutai in China and Borobudur in Indonesia. Buddhism was not the only religion moving through the network. Forms of Christianity traveled eastward. Communities associated with the Church of the East became established in Central Asia and China. A stone monument erected in Tang, China, recorded the presence of a Christian tradition that had arrived from the West. Zoroastrianism, with deep roots in the Iranian world, was practiced by merchant communities. Manichaeism, a religion founded in the 3rd century in the Persian sphere, spread widely through trade networks and gained followers among some Central Asian peoples. Jewish communities also participated in long-distance commerce and established themselves in cities along the routes. Islam expanded across Western and Central Asia from the 7th century onward. It spread through armies and states, but also through merchants, scholars, and Sufi teachers. Muslim commercial communities connected the Mediterranean, the Middle East, Central Asia, India, Southeast Asia, and China. The coexistence of religions did not mean that conflict disappeared. States favored some traditions and restricted others. Communities competed for influence. Temples and monasteries could be destroyed during war. Political change might cause a religion to lose protection. Yet, for long periods, cities along the Silk Roads contained multiple places of worship. The Mongol capital of Karakoram later became famous for having Buddhist temples, mosques, and a church. Tangchang'an also supported several foreign religious communities. In Central Asian cities, religious diversity was part of commercial life because merchants carried their beliefs with them. Pilgrimage created another reason to travel. Chinese Buddhist monks journeyed westward toward India in search of sacred texts and authoritative teachings. Their accounts became valuable historical records because they described roads, kingdoms, monasteries, customs, and geography. One of the most famous pilgrims was Xuanzang. He left China in 629, traveled through Central Asia to India, studied at important Buddhist centers, gathered manuscripts, and returned years later. His broader journey and work extended over a period often given as 629 to 654, when his travels and translation activity are considered together. Xuanzang crossed deserts and mountains, visited rulers, and studied with teachers. On his return, he helped translate a large collection of Buddhist texts into Chinese. His record provided detailed information about the regions he had visited. Centuries afterward, the memory of his journey helped inspire the 16th century novel, Journey to the West. The novel filled the pilgrimage with supernatural adventures. But behind the literary imagination stood a real traveler who had crossed the Silk Roads in pursuit of knowledge. Pilgrims were not the same as merchants, yet they depended on similar infrastructure. They needed roads, guides, lodging, food, and political permission. A monk might travel with a caravan for safety. A merchant might donate to a monastery for spiritual merit or practical hospitality. Religion and trade often supported one another in quiet ways. A merchant community could fund a temple. A monastery could offer lodging and trustworthy contacts. A pilgrimage route could become a commercial corridor. Sacred objects, manuscripts, pigments, and ritual textiles became part of exchange. The Silk Roads carried an extraordinary range of goods. Silk gave the network its famous modern name, but every region contributed products shaped by its climate, resources, and skills. From China came silk textiles, lacquerware, ceramics, paper, tea, dyes, and crafted objects. From Central Asia came horses, wool, metalwork, fruits, and precious stones. From Iran and neighboring regions came carpets, silverware, saffron, pistachios, wine, and artistic designs. India supplied cotton textiles, spices, gemstones, sandalwood, medicines, and religious objects. Arabia and Eastern Africa provided frankincense, myrrh, ivory, and other valued materials. The Mediterranean world sent glass, coral, metal goods, wine, and gold. Southeast Asia contributed aromatic woods and spices. The steppe supplied animals, hides, and skills associated with mounted travel. Some foods now familiar in distant regions moved through these connections. Fruits, vegetables, grains, and methods of cultivation traveled with merchants and migrants. A seed carried in a pack could have a longer historical effect than a jewel. Plants adapted to new soils and entered new cuisines. Spices were especially valuable because they were light, concentrated, and desirable. They flavored food, entered medicines, perfumes, and religious rituals, and could survive long journeys when properly stored. The demand for spices helped sustain maritime trade and later influenced European exploration. Tea gradually became a major commodity, though its importance changed over time. Wine moved in the opposite direction into China. Grapes and winemaking had strong associations with Western regions, and foreign wines became known in Chinese cities. Music traveled through instruments and performers. The Smithsonian has noted the family of instrument names related to the Persian word tar, meaning string. Names such as dutar, sitar, sitar, and guitar preserve traces of linguistic and musical movement across cultures. A musical instrument cannot be understood only as an object. Someone must know how to tune and play it. Therefore, music traveled through human skill. A court might invite foreign musicians. A community might adapt an instrument to local scales and styles. Dances entered new settings, changing as performers learned them. Architectural ideas moved with craftsmen, travelers, and religious communities. Decorative tile work, domes, arches, pagodas, and garden traditions developed within local histories, but were also shaped by contact. Irrigation techniques spread between regions, facing similar problems of water and dry land. Central Asian irrigation systems show how practical knowledge could travel. Travelers observed methods of channeling water, managing wells, and sustaining agriculture in arid environments. Such knowledge was rarely celebrated like silk, but it allowed cities and farms to survive. Medical knowledge moved in many directions. Herbs and minerals were traded. Physicians compared traditions. Under the Mongols, Kublai Khan established an imperial medical institution that included practitioners connected with Chinese, Indian, Middle Eastern, and Muslim knowledge. Astronomy also benefited from exchange. Accurate calendars mattered to agriculture, religion, and government. Courts welcomed experts who could observe the heavens. Kublai's court included astronomers from several cultural backgrounds and supported an institute of Muslim astronomy. Mathematical knowledge passed through translations and scholarly communities. Indian numerals and ideas moved through the Islamic world toward Europe. Greek works preserved and developed in Arabic became available to European readers. Chinese innovations entered Western regions through complex chains of contact. Paper was among the most influential technologies to travel. Forms of writing material existed in many cultures, but paper production developed in China and spread westward. By around the 8th century, papermaking had become established in Samarkand. It later spread through the Islamic world and reached Europe through regions including Spain and Sicily. Paper was lighter and often less expensive than many earlier writing materials. Its spread supported administration, literature, scholarship, religious copying, and commerce. Over time, the availability of paper helped make written communication more common. Printing methods also developed in East Asia. Knowledge of paper and printing transformed the preservation and circulation of texts. The later European printing press emerged within a different technological setting, yet the arrival of paper was an essential foundation for the mass production of books. Gunpowder originated in China and later moved westward. Early Chinese references describe explosive mixtures and fireworks, and military applications developed over time. By the later Middle Ages, gunpowder knowledge had reached Europe, where it was adapted for cannon and firearms. This movement altered warfare and political power. Fortifications changed. States that mastered gunpowder weapons gained advantages. A substance first explored in one cultural context became part of military systems across much of the world. Glass-making techniques also crossed the network, including movement eastward from the Islamic world toward China. Chinese ceramics traveled westward and inspired imitation. Porcelain, with its hardness, translucence, and fine surface, became highly prized. Long before Europeans learned to produce true porcelain, imported Chinese wares shaped taste and decoration. Textile knowledge moved far beyond silk. Cotton, wool, dyeing methods, loom technology, embroidery, and resist dye techniques circulated. The method now widely known as ikat developed in multiple regional traditions and became famous in Central Asia and beyond. A technique could move without a single written instruction. An artisan might be captured in war, invited by a ruler, married into another community, or join a merchant colony. After the Battle of Talas in 751, Chinese artisans were reportedly taken west as prisoners, contributing to the transfer of skills. The story of technology along the Silk Roads is therefore not a simple list of inventions moving from one civilization to another. It is a story of adoption. Knowledge had to be understood, supported by materials, fitted to local needs, and taught to others. A paper mill required water, fibers, tools, and labor. A new loom required skilled operators. A foreign medical remedy had to be evaluated. A navigation method had to be adapted to a particular sea. Exchange created possibilities, but communities decided how to use them. Art moved in the same way. A foreign object might be admired, misunderstood, copied, or altered. A Chinese silk with an Iranian-style pattern could reach Byzantium, where a local weaver made another version. A Buddhist image influenced by Hellenistic sculpture could be carried east, where artists gave it new features. This endless transformation makes it difficult to draw sharp boundaries around cultural ownership. The Silk Roads did not erase difference. Persian, Chinese, Indian, Arab, Roman, Turkic, and other traditions remained distinct, yet their boundaries were crossed again and again. The Tang period is often remembered as an age when cultural exchange reached a remarkable height. Yet the dynasty also experienced rebellion, war, and contraction. The An Lushan Rebellion began in 755 and weakened the empire. Tang forces withdrew from western regions, and direct control over important routes diminished. The Tibetan Empire gained influence in the northwest, and at times controlled Dunhuang and other strategic areas. Uyghur powers became important partners and competitors. Trade continued, but the political landscape changed. The Tang dynasty ended in 907. In the centuries that followed, no single power united the whole Silk Road network. Regional states controlled different sections. Maritime commerce grew increasingly important. Islamic cities flourished across Central Asia and the Middle East. China was reunited under the Song dynasty, whose economy and maritime trade became highly developed. The Song period saw major growth in cities, commerce, technology, and seaborne exchange. Chinese ships and foreign merchants linked ports to Southeast Asia, India, and the Islamic world. Quanzhou became one of the great ports of the age. Ceramics moved in enormous quantities by sea. Overland routes remained active, but political divisions in northern China affected them. The Liao, Western Xia, Jin, and other states controlled territories between the Song and Central Asia. Trade crossed borders, though conditions varied. In the western part of Eurasia, the Byzantine Empire maintained its own silk industry. Damascus and other cities became centers of textile production. Islamic civilization connected regions from Spain and North Africa through the Middle East toward Central and South Asia. Scholars working in Arabic translated, preserved, and expanded knowledge from Greek, Persian, Indian, and other traditions. Medicine, mathematics, astronomy, philosophy, and geography developed within this broad intellectual world. European scholars later encountered much of this knowledge through translations from Arabic. The Crusades, beginning at the end of the 11th century, brought conflict between European Christian powers and Muslim states in the Eastern Mediterranean. Yet, even during war, goods and ideas crossed frontiers. Crusaders returned with silks, carpets, and knowledge of Eastern luxuries. Italian cities expanded commercial connections. Venice, Genoa, Florence, and Lucca became important in European silk trade and production. Artisans in Italy learned methods that had traveled through Byzantine and Islamic worlds. By the later Middle Ages and Renaissance, Italian silk weaving had developed into a celebrated art. The roads were therefore changing before the Mongols created their vast empire. Sea routes had grown. Regional industries reduced dependence on Chinese silk. European demand for Asian goods remained strong, but the balance among routes shifted. Then, in the 13th century, the conquests of Genghis Khan and his descendants transformed Eurasia. The Mongol Empire expanded from the Pacific toward Eastern Europe and the Middle East. Its campaigns caused immense destruction and loss of life. Cities were conquered, populations displaced, and states overthrown. At the same time, Mongol control eventually brought large areas under related political authorities. Historians often use the term Pax Mongolica to describe the period of greater movement and relative security across parts of the empire after conquest stabilized. This peace was not gentle in its origins. It rested on military dominance and severe punishment for resistance. Yet, within Mongol-controlled territories, merchants, envoys, artisans, and religious figures could travel across distances that had previously required passage through many hostile states. The Mongols valued communication. They developed systems of roads, relay stations, and official messengers. The Yam postal network provided horses and lodging at intervals. Authorized travelers carried tablets or documents, granting access to support. Merchants received protection because trade brought revenue and useful goods. The Mongols also relocated skilled artisans and administrators across the empire. Such forced movement caused suffering, but it spread techniques and created new centers of production. Genghis Khan's descendants ruled different parts of the empire. Although the Mongol world eventually divided into khanates, diplomatic and commercial relationships continued among them. The Ilkhanate ruled in Iran and neighboring regions. The Golden Horde controlled parts of the western steppe. The Chagatai Khanate held Central Asian territories. In China, Kublai Khan founded the Yuan dynasty. Kublai established his capital at Khanbalik, the city later known as Beijing. He completed the conquest of the southern Song in 1279. Yuan China became part of a larger Mongol political world that connected with Central Asia and beyond. Kublai's court welcomed people from many regions: Persian, Arab, Central Asian, Tibetan, Chinese, and European visitors and officials appeared in Yuan records. The government relied on a diverse administration. It supported astronomy, medicine, engineering, and trade. Maritime commerce also flourished under the Yuan. Ports such as Quanzhou connected China to the Indian Ocean. Ships carried ceramics, silk, spices, and many other goods. The Mongol period was not only an age of overland caravans. European rulers and religious leaders became more interested in the Mongol world. They sent envoys eastward, hoping for alliances, information, or opportunities for conversion. Giovanni da Pian del Carpini traveled from 1245 to 1247 as an envoy of Pope Innocent IV. William of Rubruck journeyed from 1253 to 1255 on a mission associated with King Louis IX of France. Their accounts described Mongol society and the vast distances of Eurasia. William reached the Mongol capital of Karakoram and observed its religious diversity. Such journeys expanded European knowledge, even when diplomatic hopes were not fulfilled. And then came the traveler, whose name became more closely associated with the Silk Road than almost any other: Marco Polo. Marco Polo was born in Venice into a merchant family. His father, Niccolo, and his uncle, Maffeo, had already travelled eastward and reached the world of the Mongols. In 1271, the two older men set out again, this time accompanied by the young Marco. Their journey took them across the Mediterranean and through Western Asia. They continued overland through regions connected by the Silk Roads, moving across landscapes that changed from settled farmland to high mountains and dry plateaus. The trip required years rather than months. The Polos eventually reached the court of Kublai Khan. Sources commonly place their arrival in 1275. Kublai ruled a realm of remarkable scale, and Marco later described the wealth, cities, administration, roads, and customs he encountered. According to the account associated with his travels, Marco remained in Kublai's service for many years. The exact nature of every position he held remains debated, but his narrative presents him as a trusted traveller and observer within the Mongol realm. He described Khanbalik, the great capital, the summer palace at Shangdu, often called Xanadu in European tradition, the use of paper money, the imperial postal system, and the resources of regions unfamiliar to most European readers. After roughly 24 years in Asia, the Polos returned to Venice in 1295. Their return journey included travel by sea. Not long afterward, Marco became a prisoner during conflict between Venice and Genoa. In prison, he dictated or related his experiences to Rustichello of Pisa, a writer familiar with popular romances. The resulting book became known under titles including The Travels of Marco Polo. It mixed geographical observation, commercial information, courtly description, and stories received from others. Readers debated parts of it, but the work became enormously influential. For Europeans, the book offered a broad and vivid image of Asia. It described powerful states and wealthy cities, rather than an empty distance beyond familiar lands. It helped sustain interest in Eastern commerce, geography, and travel. Marco Polo did not call the routes the Silk Road. That name did not yet exist. nor was he the first European to reach Mongol Asia. Yet his long narrative became a symbol of travel between worlds. It is easy to imagine his name standing alone, but his journey depended on the same shared systems that supported countless less famous travelers. Guides led the way. Animals carried supplies. Communities provided shelter. Officials granted passage. Sailors knew the winds. Translators made communication possible. The fame of one traveler can hide the multitude. Behind Marco Polo were merchants whose names were never written down, caravan workers who knew a single desert, women who produced textiles, farmers who supplied grain, and sailors who crossed one familiar stretch of sea. The Mongol period encouraged movement, but it also connected regions in darker ways. Armies traveled quickly. Conquered populations were relocated. Information about distant conflicts moved along roads, and disease could follow the same paths as trade. The Silk Roads carried life, knowledge, and beauty, but they also carried danger. Disease has always followed human movement. A traveler could bring an infection from one community to another before understanding that he was ill. Fleas, rodents, livestock, food, water, and crowded lodging could all contribute to transmission. The plague pandemic known in Europe as the Black Death spread across Eurasia in the 14th century. Its exact roots and origins remain subjects of research, but long-distance trade and Mongol-era connections likely helped disease move between regions. In the late 1340s, plague reached ports and cities around the Mediterranean. It killed an enormous share of the population in Europe and caused devastating loss elsewhere across Eurasia and North Africa. Communities faced fear, labor shortages, economic disruption, and social change. The same roads that allowed silk, paper, and religious ideas to travel also made distant populations more vulnerable to a common disease. Connaught opportunity, but it also created shared risk. Caravanserais and ports placed travelers close together. Ships carried people and animals for long periods. Markets gathered goods from many origins. In ordinary times, such concentrations supported commerce. During an epidemic, it could become dangerous. The spread of plague was not a moral judgment on trade, nor was trade its only cause. Disease followed complex ecological and human conditions. Still, the pandemic reveals that early forms of globalization had consequences beyond wealth and cultural exchange. Travelers also faced local illnesses, contaminated water, injuries, and exhaustion. A minor wound could become serious. Medical help varied greatly. A merchant might carry remedies from several traditions. combining knowledge learned from different communities. The network spread medical ideas even as it spread disease. Physicians compared symptoms and treatments. Herbal substances moved between regions. Hospitals and charitable institutions developed in several civilizations. Connection produced both vulnerability and response. When we think quietly about the Silk Roads, it may be helpful not to make them too perfect. They were neither a peaceful dream of universal friendship, nor only a landscape of violence. They contained cooperation and competition, welcome and exclusion, curiosity and misunderstanding. Merchants learned foreign customs because doing so was useful. But usefulness could lead to genuine familiarity. Rulers protected travelers for revenue, but protection could allow art and scholarship to flourish. Empires destroyed cities and also built roads. The history is woven from contradictions. By the 15th century, the relative importance of many overland routes was changing. The Mongol Empire had divided, and its successor states competed. Political conditions along different corridors became less predictable. Regional wars, tolls, and insecurity affected commerce. The Ottoman conquest of Constantinople in 1453 is often used as a symbolic date in stories about the end of the Silk Road. The reality was more gradual. Trade did not suddenly stop, and the Ottoman Empire itself became a major center of commerce between Asia and Europe. Yet European powers increasingly sought maritime routes that would give them more direct access to Asian goods. Overland trade involved many intermediaries and fees. Sea transport could move larger cargoes at lower cost. Portuguese navigators explored the coast of Africa in search of a route to the Indian Ocean. In 1498, Vasco da Gama reached India by sea from Europe. Christopher Columbus sailed westward in 1492, partly because he hoped to reach Asia by another route. Instead, his voyage connected Europe more directly with the Americas and began a new era of conquest, colonization, forced migration, and global exchange. The European search for sea routes was shaped by the desire for spices, silk, and other Asian goods. In this way, the long history of the Silk Roads contributed indirectly to the age of exploration. As direct maritime connections expanded, Central Asian caravan trade lost some of its earlier role in exchange between China and Europe. Ships could carry far more cargo than camels. European trading companies established fortified ports and colonial networks. But the old roads did not vanish. Regional commerce continued. Pilgrims, merchants, nomadic communities, armies, and local travelers still crossed Central Asia. Caravanserais remained in use in some places into the 19th century. Silk, horses, tea, and other goods continued to move along land routes. The sea did not replace the land everywhere or all at once. Instead, the balance shifted. Some cities declined when traffic moved away. Others adapted to new political and economic realities. Ports grew as caravan towns weakened. China also changed. The Mongol Yuan dynasty fell in 1368, and the Ming dynasty took power. Chinese silk and ceramics remained central to international markets, while the balance between overland and maritime trade continued to shift. Silk production had already spread across much of Eurasia. Byzantine, Persian, Arab, Central Asian, and Italian workshops created their own fabrics. In Europe, cities such as Venice, Florence, Genoa, and Lucca became known for silk weaving. Italian artisans developed velvets, brocades, and other luxurious textiles. Older motifs from Asia were transformed for European courts and churches. Silk continued to move, but the world of production was no longer centered exclusively in China. The Ottoman and Persian empires competed over trade and textile production. European states tried to control markets. France developed an important silk industry in Lyon. England attempted sericulture. Colonists brought mulberry trees and silkworms to parts of North America. Some experiments succeeded for a time, while others failed because of climate, labor, disease, or economic competition. Imported silk remained desirable. In the 19th century, Paterson, New Jersey, became a center of the American silk industry and was known as Silk City. Technology changed textile production. The jacquard loom, introduced in the early 19th century, used punched cards to control complex patterns. The cards later influenced the development of punched card systems used in computing. Synthetic dyes expanded the range and consistency of colors. Industrial machinery increased production. Silk remained a luxury, but it entered wider markets through changing manufacturing methods. The old network had helped move silk from China to distant consumers. The modern industrial world reorganized production on a much larger scale. Raw silk from Asia could be shipped to factories in Europe and America, dyed, woven, sold, and imitated. Yet, even in modern factories, patterns preserved memories of older exchange. European chinoiserie imitated imagined Chinese styles. Turquerie drew on Ottoman forms. Kashmiri shawls influenced fashion. Artistic borrowing continued, though it was often shaped by unequal imperial power and romantic stereotypes. The meaning of the Silk Road also began to change. It became not only a historical network, but a metaphor for connection between Europe and Asia. In the 19th century, European and Asian explorers, archaeologists, geographers, and scholars traveled through Central Asia with new purposes. Some sought ancient cities and manuscripts. Others mapped terrain for imperial governments. Russia and Britain competed for influence in a struggle often called the Great Game. Central Asia again became a region of strategic concern. Russian expansion moved southward. British authorities worried about routes toward India. Afghanistan and neighboring lands became areas of diplomatic pressure, espionage, and war. Scholars worked within this imperial setting. Their discoveries increased knowledge, but their expeditions also removed many objects from the places where they had been created and preserved. Manuscripts, paintings, sculptures, and textiles entered museums and collections far from Central Asia. Ferdinand von Richthofen traveled widely in China between 1868 and 1872. In 1877, he popularized the German term Seidenstraße. He used it in a geographical and historical discussion of trade routes, especially those connecting China with Central Asia. The phrase gathered power because it transformed many difficult roads into a single memorable image. It helped scholars organize research and helped the public imagine ancient global connection. But it also simplified the past. The singular Silk Road can make it seem as though one route led directly from China to Rome. It can place China and Europe at the center, while reducing Central Asia, India, Iran, Arabia, and Africa to spaces in between. Modern scholars, therefore, often prefer Silk Roads or other broader terms. Some historians argue that maritime trade with India and Arabia was more economically important to Rome than overland silk trade with China. Others emphasize that the idea of a coherent road may exaggerate the ease of ancient East-West movement. These debates do not deny that goods and ideas traveled. They ask us to describe the process more carefully. The network was fragmented, changing, and dependent on intermediaries. Silk was important, but so were cotton, spices, horses, silver, ceramics, paper, and countless local products. India and Iran were not side routes. Steppe peoples were not obstacles standing outside history. The sea was not secondary. Such corrections make the story richer. Instead of imagining a narrow road, we can picture many centers. Chang'an was one center. Samarkand was another. Merv, Baghdad, Constantinople, Antioch, Alexandria, Quanzhou, Muscat, Goa, and Zanzibar were others. No single city contained the entire network. Each saw only part of it, yet each helped sustain the whole. Archaeological work in the deserts of western China revealed abandoned towns, cave temples, letters, contracts, coins, paintings, and textiles. Dry conditions preserved materials that would have disappeared elsewhere. At Dunhuang, a sealed cave chamber contained tens of thousands of manuscripts and other objects. When the chamber became known to scholars around the beginning of the 20th century, its contents greatly expanded modern knowledge of life along the Silk Roads. The manuscripts are now held in collections in several countries. Their dispersal reflects the complicated history of early archaeological exploration, in which important discoveries were often removed from the regions where they had been preserved. The documents reveal ordinary as well as sacred life. There are Buddhist writings, administrative records, contracts, calendars, letters, and works in several languages. Together, they show that Dunhuang was a place of translation, travel, worship, government, and commerce. A manuscript can be modest in appearance and still open a wide historical view. A merchant's letter may reveal prices and family concerns. A traveler's phrasebook may show the need to communicate across languages. A religious text may show how translation changed a teaching. Textiles recovered from caves and tombs reveal shared patterns. Coins show political and commercial connections. Archaeological discoveries continue to revise the story, sometimes revealing that a city, port, or community was more important than earlier histories had recognized. The Silk Roads are therefore not a finished story. New evidence changes emphasis. A shipwreck may reveal direct maritime trade. A group once described only through imperial records may become visible through its own letters. The legacy of the Silk Roads remains in places, objects, languages, and customs. Ruined caravanserais stand beside modern highways. Ancient ports lie beneath later cities. Irrigation channels still shape fields. Religious monuments mark the movement of belief. Words have travelled. Foods have travelled. Musical instruments preserve related names. Decorative patterns appear in cultures separated by great distance. The spread of paper changed how societies recorded memory. The spread of technologies altered work and warfare. The legacy also lies in mixed communities. Merchants settled abroad, married locally, and raised families connected to more than one cultural world. Religious minorities built places of worship. Translators created vocabularies that remained after the travelers themselves were gone. Cities along the routes became accustomed to visitors. their populations changed continually. This did not eliminate prejudice or conflict, but it created spaces where difference had to be negotiated. UNESCO describes the Silk Roads as routes of dialogue. This phrase emphasizes that exchange was not limited to merchandise. People had to listen, explain, learn, and adapt. Logog could be unequal, imperfect, or practical, but it still changed those who participated. A merchant who learned a foreign measure changed the way he calculated value. A monk who translated a scripture changed the language of faith. A weaver who studied an imported cloth changed local design. A sailor who learned a new navigational method changed the possibilities of travel. Some exchanges were voluntary. Others resulted from conquest, enslavement, or forced relocation. The beauty of an object does not erase the suffering that may have accompanied its movement. Historical connection can contain both creativity and coercion. The Mongol conquests connected Eurasia, but devastated many communities. European maritime expansion connected oceans, but led to colonial rule and forced labor. Archaeological exploration preserved knowledge, but also removed cultural property. To remember the Silk Roads honestly is to hold these truths together. Connection is powerful, but it is not automatically fair. Exit can enrich societies, but the conditions of exchange matter. Still, the long history shows a persistent human desire to cross distance. People traveled for wealth, faith, knowledge, duty, survival, curiosity, and ambition. They carried small pieces of their homes and returned, when they could, with something new. Perhaps a merchant leaving Samarkand did not think of himself as participating in global history. He thought about the next market, the health of his animals, the safety of his family, and the price of his cargo. A sailor leaving Muscat watched the wind. A monk leaving Chang'an guarded manuscripts and remembered instructions. Their individual horizons were limited, as ours are. Yet together, their movements connected continents. Today, the phrase New Silk Road is used for modern railways, highways, pipelines, and international development projects. China's Belt and Road Initiative has adopted the historical image of Eurasian connection. Modern trains cross some of the same broad regions once traveled by caravans. The resemblance should not be made too simple. A freight train is not a camel caravan. Modern states, technologies, economies, and political goals are very different. Yet the older name remains attractive because it suggests a deep history of exchange. UNESCO has recognized sections of the historic routes as World Heritage Sites. The Chang'an-Tianshan Corridor was designated in 2014. The Zarafshan-Karakum corridor was designated in 2023. These transnational sites include cities, passes, religious monuments, and remains of infrastructure. Preserving such places requires cooperation across modern borders. The ancient network did not follow today's national boundaries. Its heritage belongs to many communities. Now, as the story grows quieter, we can return to the roads themselves. Imagine, without needing to see every detail, a path leaving the walls of Chang'an. Behind it lies a great city of officials, markets, temples, workshops, and crowded streets. Ahead lies the Hexi corridor, narrow between mountains and desert. The traveler moves slowly west. Days pass. Fortified gates mark the edge of imperial control. Dunhuang appears with its fields and trees. Beyond it, the road divides. One path turns north of the Taklamakan. Another follows the south. Neither is the single true road. Both belong to the network. Farther away, other travelers are taking other routes entirely. At an oasis, camels kneel while their loads are removed. Water is drawn. A merchant asks about the next town. A monk rests beneath a wall painted with sacred images. A translator listens to two languages and searches for a phrase that both sides will understand. Farther west, snow lies on mountain peaks above the Fergana Valley. Horses graze in greener land. In Samarkand, traders inspect cloth and silver. In Merv, news arrives from Iran. Across the plateau, a caravan approaches Mesopotamia. Rivers offer another means of transport. At Palmyra, goods are stored before the desert crossing. At Antioch, a ship waits in the harbour. Elsewhere, on the Indian Ocean, sailors prepare for the seasonal wind. They take on fresh water and food. Spices are packed against moisture. The ship's timbers are checked. Families say farewell. In a Roman city, silk appears in a market, astonishing in its lightness. In a Chinese court, a glass vessel catches the light. Neither object can explain its own journey. It simply carries the evidence of distant hands. Centuries pass. The Han court sends envoys. The Tang capital welcomes merchants and musicians. Buddhist pilgrims cross mountains. Arab sailors navigate the sea. Sogdian families maintain trading colonies. Mongol messengers change horses at relay stations. European friars travel toward Karakoram. Marco Polo returns to Venice with stories of Kublai Khan. More centuries pass. Ships round Africa. Caravan cities lose some of their traffic. Silk looms work in Italy and France. Explorers enter the deserts with maps and notebooks. Manuscripts leave Dunhuang for distant museums. Scholars begin to call the ancient network the Silk Road. And still the deeper story remains a story of many roads. It is a story of silk, but also of horses and paper, glass and spices, fruit and medicine, music and mathematics. It is a story of emperors, but also of guides, artisans, translators, sailors, farmers, and innkeepers. It is a story of connection, but not of complete unity. People remained different. Languages remained different. Beliefs sometimes met peacefully, and sometimes came into conflict. Yet contact made isolation impossible. A pattern crossed a border. A word entered another language. A religious image took a new form. A practical technique found a new use. Small changes accumulated. Perhaps this is the most lasting image of the Silk Roads. Not a single heroic traveler crossing the world, but countless people carrying something a little farther than it had gone before. One person carried silk from one city to the next. Another carried it onward. One monk translated a page. Another copied it. One sailor learned a route. Another taught it to a younger crew. No one needed to complete the entire journey. The connection was created by continuation. And now, you do not need to continue following every name or date. The roads can fade gently into distance. The cities can become quiet. The market gates can close for the night. The camels have been unloaded. The horses have been given water. A ship rests at anchor beneath a dark sky. In a caravanserai courtyard, voices become softer as travelers settle down. Tomorrow, they may continue toward another pass, another oasis, another port. But for this moment, the journey has paused. The silk is safely stored. The lamps are low. The road beyond the gate can wait until morning. And just as the travelers once rested between one part of their journey and the next, you may rest now as well. There is nowhere else you need to travel tonight. There is nothing more you need to carry. The long roads are quiet. The desert wind has softened. The distant sea is calm. And the story may drift away, slowly, like a fine thread disappearing into the dark.